The champions have crumbled. Global esports is no longer global because they are going home. EMEA is now back on top after 1,000 days, or is China number one? We're going to cover all of that today in CompCheck episode number 10, now sponsored by Sony InZone. More about them in just a little bit. Today, I want to start off the episode by talking about the first four teams eliminated from Masters London. We just concluded the Swiss stage. The playoffs start tomorrow. And so we're going to try and hustle through this to get our predictions out by the end of the episode. Let's start with the bottom of the group. FULLSENSE. FULLSENSE came into Masters London with a lot of expectation and quite a bit of hype, considering that they brought arguably the best player in the world into the tournament. Primi lived up to the hype. Let's be honest about that. He was incredible most of the time, and yet it wasn't enough because his team couldn't bring the same level of firepower that they were showing in Pacific. And I think this is an interesting area for FULLSENSE to now have to tackle going into stage number 2, because they are nowhere near qualifying for champions, right? FULLSENSE has essentially no champions points. And while they did gain some global experience, what they showed wasn't great. I would say that outside of Primi, they didn't have very much going for them. The first match that they played against Foot was honestly kind of embarrassing. It was probably the worst match that we saw at the entire tournament in terms of one-sidedness. And to me, it really looked like a team that was afraid of the moment. This is something that we talk about with sort of younger teams a lot, where, they're coming up from being at home to now playing on a big stage, maybe in a different country, different food, different environment. It's a lot less comfortable. And a lot of times there's sort of like worry about a team maybe falling off as a result. And to be perfectly honest, Foot are kind of in that category as well, right? Sop is newly 18, playing his very first international event in his very first season. Zeus is quite young, Crostally is young, Yedijay is young, although he does have quite a bit more experience than his teammates. And then Sociable is sort of the old head, but has not really had a ton of, deep international experience in Valorant either. So I think that sort of inexperienced excuse for FULLSENSE goes out the window. This is a team that is also quite young. We will give them that. But Cruz has been to internationals before. Jip Boys and even Primi has been to internationals before. And the level at which they play domestically versus what we saw at Masters London was completely different. I think they were probably the team, speaking of FULLSENSE, that looked the most different from what they showed domestically to the international event. And a lot of that just had to do with how they played the game. They are known for being a pretty sort of, fly by the seat of their pants team. They tend to take chances and brawl and fight together. And all of that is sort of anchored in Cruz's generally pretty good IGLing, where he's able to manipulate the map and direct his team to find the gaps in the defense. But against Foot, they didn't really even have a chance to lean into his IGLing because they were just getting rolled. The started off 13-3 on Fracture, and this wasn't even a matter of strategy or comp. This was literally just Foot was out shooting them every single time that FULLSENSE had the opportunity to make a play. They would try to make the play, but they were all just getting deleted from the server before they could really do anything. And that's not normally how FULLSENSE games go. At the very least, even if they're losing, they tend to be showing moments of mechanical brilliance. But against Foot, they're just getting sat down and kind of bullied for the entire series, and it was not pretty. And that made me very worried for their prospects going forward. And ultimately, they ended up matching up against Global Esports, which is, maybe it's an unlucky match, or maybe it is a lucky match, considering that it's something that is sort of familiar to them. I will say that in this match, they looked a lot more comfortable, as you would kind of expect against a domestic opponent. But also, They just weren't really able to, pull it together outside of really Primi, and some okay moments from Jit Boys and Kahlua as well. I think as far as Full Sense goes, it kind of makes me wonder. Another thing that is worth talking about is against Foot, they didn't put Primi on Jet at all. They played 2 maps where Primi was on Phoenix, and I was immediately critical of this just because the reason that they made this tournament is because they had Primi playing Jet and playing like a psycho in Pacific. He was constantly just covering half the map by himself on defense, taking chances, being sort of like the next gen Osboss as far as crazy plays, surviving in wild situations, coming out with miraculous 3Ks, 4Ks. And we saw none of that in the Foot series because Primi was chained to this. He was chained to the ground, right? He's on an agent that just has to run in, and he was chained to the pack because he's playing an agent that doesn't really function very well solo. So Full Sense did make an adjustment going into their second series against Global, where they put him on Jet on every single map, and we can see that he dropped a plus 34 with the best rating out of all 10 players, despite losing. And so I have to wonder, had he been on Jet for the entire series, would they have been in a better place? My guess is probably it wouldn't have mattered that much, just because of how afraid and uncomfortable they looked in their first series. But maybe if they had Primi sort of, leading the way on his comfort agent with the freedom to make plays, they might not have gotten stopped and then maybe broken their confidence and sort of lost their way. Going into stage 2, I think Full Sense has some pretty tough choices to make because now that they are a full tie team, their pool of players is significantly smaller than it would be speaking English. And I think it's safe to say that if they want to make champs, they either need sort of a full-on revelation in terms of this 5, or they might need a roster move. I think that Leviathan, unfortunately, is probably the main target because he has not really looked very comfortable on any of the roles they've played him on, really. He's, historically, I guess he's historically a smokes player. He was playing some recon as well. But he didn't look great at this tournament, and he didn't look great when he was playing the Cypher. And yeah, the overall roles of this team seem to be a little bit problematic as well. I mean, Jit Boys has been an incredible sort of anchor lurk player for this team for over a year, but now he's slotting into the secondary duelist position / kind of the main duelist position because Primi is not necessarily a hard entry. And I think that combined with having sort of young players that are not really super comfortable has led Full Sense to really crumble on the big stage. And now they have to get top 2 in Pacific, otherwise they're not going to go to champs. So I would not be surprised if they do come up with a different roster going into stage 2. But the chances of them sort of bouncing back are maybe a little bit lower than they would have been had they not just gotten stopped. Okay, let's move on to the next team out of Masters London, and that's Dragon Ranger Gaming. Honestly, not too much to say about this team. They got rolled by Vitality, and then they lost a fairly close matchup against their domestic rivals. I guess it's been a bit of a rivalry, but I think more recently than not, XLG has won. This one was, it was nice to see DRG with their full roster on the big stage. I think we saw some fairly nice moments from Spirit Z1, who is a player that I've definitely been interested in seeing play internationally from China. And then, of course, seeing Vukashu on the big stage was also very cool. However, I think this team is fairly low in terms of their ceiling, and their floor is potentially even lower. I mean, honestly, Life has been a liability for this team for basically the entire year. He was kind of a liability for FPX before that, and he doesn't really seem to have found his place. I think I would probably take Spirit over him as the main duelist. Maybe if he wasn't playing Neon Phoenix, he would have a little bit of a better performance, but I think I would still probably rather have Spirit on Jet and in that main role. So where does that leave DRG going forward? I think we'll kind of have to see. It was very interesting to do the listen-ins where we got to hear them calming, and it was basically just like they're communicating in Chinese, in Mandarin, and then Fukashi will just say some things in English, and then there will be a little bit of English communication, and then back to communicating in Mandarin, which is a very crazy system. But it's worked well enough, but I also definitely think that's something that's going to limit their potential going forward as a team. The Vitality game was, it was just a better team, sort of dominating. Vitality is very skilled, and they looked like it against a team that put up almost no resistance. So definitely Vitality stocks pretty good, but for DRG, this was kind of the expected result. I think I would probably not even put them in the top 3 in China, even though they did make it as the top 3, as the number 3 seed rather. But if I'm just thinking about how the season has played out, I would probably still rank a team like Tyloo or AG over them if they had to play each other, like 10 times in a row. I would probably take both of those teams over DRG anyway. So I wouldn't necessarily say that China sent their best to this tournament. That being said, we'll have to see how Stage 2 shakes out. There's definitely a chance that they could still make champs, but it'll probably be by going deep in Stage 2 if they can manage that. Okay, let's talk about Global Esports. Global Esports came in with... It's interesting. Global Esports came in with no expectations and yet very high expectations. And my take on this team was that if they could win their first match against Lev, that they had a very good chance to go on a pretty deep run. I said that if they can beat Lev, they can make top 4. And they did not beat Lev, and they did not make it out of the group stage. But they played 9 maps. They played some of the most Valorant of any team because every single series was close. And they started off against Lev, who is a very, very good team and has proven that they're a very, very good team. And they started off dominating Lev. This was a masterclass. I think ever since Global has started playing Pearl and they've been playing Crystal on the Killjoy, they've looked great. This is something that I experimented with a little bit last year with Crystal. Is like, I thought his playstyle was kind of sentinel-y. He's kind of a lurker. He likes to take timings and make individual plays. And so I'm glad to see that they're leaning into that a little bit more. And it helps, obviously, that Javi is cemented as their caller. So Crystal doesn't have to call from the sentinel position like you would have for the 2025 team. But I think that GE is definitely... They're definitely cooking. Like they're not a bad team, even though they did not make it out of the Swiss stage. And I think their game against Lev kind of proves that. It was very close. They definitely were in control and could have won this series. But they have a little bit of what I would call a throwing problem. It's not even necessarily that they make like super egregious mistakes, but they definitely lose rounds at the wrong time is a huge part of their problem, I think. And, certain players kind of tend to go missing at the wrong time. And I think in this series, specifically against Lev, I saw that a lot from Patman, who has been an absolute hero for this team so far this year. He's like one of the main reasons that they qualified. But we can see, he dropped a minus 17 playing 3 different roles, which so far this year has not really been a problem, but I do think that his play style, which has carried them so far, was getting punished a lot more in this series. And I'm not entirely sure whether it's because the timings that he was taking. The thing about Patman is that he's got the Paper X gene in him, so he'll just take a solo timing through a smoke blind and kill 3 people and save a round. And that was working consistently in kickoff in stage 1. But here, it seemed like he was trying too hard, and he was constantly getting caught in moments where he might have gotten away with it in the past. And that was definitely one of my worries about this team coming into the event, is that how long can Patman's magic like last? How long is it going to work? And it turns out that it didn't work at this event, and that was sort of a defining factor of why GE maybe didn't go on. Now, not to put all the blame on Patman, because this really was a team loss. Specifically, moving on to their next couple of series, they did go on to beat FULLSENSE, which we already covered, but this was very much a comfort match for them. This was sort of a big coming out party for Crystal, I would say. I think he looked incredible, especially in the last map. This is one thing that I knew about Crystal last year, having coached him, is that he is not a player that will struggle with nerves on stage. He is very obviously somebody that was sort of like built for the moment. And I think we saw that, coming out and really dominating on the last map in a potential elimination game. His timings were great. His aim looked incredible. And he really did kind of win them several rounds by himself. So that was great to see. Now, the main problem arose, and there was moments here as well, right? GE did win a pistol and then lose an anti-eco, but that's something that I'm going to harp on, is their anti-eco plans and their protocols were severely lacking at this event and really cost them in a big way. I mean, specifically moving on to their third series against XLG. Again, a game that has a lot of sort of interesting subtext, because there are lots of teammates on either side of this game at this point. Obviously, Crystal qualified for VCTCN with XLG and then got removed because they didn't have 2 import slots anymore. So they chose Rarga instead of their IGL at the time. And so this was kind of a cool revenge game potentially, but it was also a game where we saw sort of that big problem area for GE come out, which is that they seem to struggle with carrying momentum. Like, they got out to a lot of leads in this series, and even throughout this entire event, they got out to a lot of leads, and then they would lose sort of like one kind of critical round that maybe they shouldn't have, whether it be against an enemy eco or maybe a man advantage situation with some ults in a post plant or something like that. Seemed to keep happening, that maybe with just a little bit more composure, maybe with slightly better communication, maybe taking a little bit less chances when they didn't need to, if they just kind of played a little bit more fundamentally correct, they might have made it through this group stage. And honestly, they could have potentially even made it through the group stage in 2-0 fashion. But the wheels really fell off this one. I think realistically on several different maps, it was pretty surprising to see them allow XLG have Lotus in this series. But at the same time, the subtext for this series that they are scrim partners, and so who knows how many times they've played this comp against each other. Who knows how often they have kind of helped develop the comp for XLG. It's very hard to kind of read into how the veto went down. We did see that GE banned Fracture, XLG banned Pearl, which had been GE's best map. And then GE picking Haven was kind of an interesting thing, but they did win it, sort of targeting XLG's weak Haven. But that meant that because they had banned Fracture, they left Lotus in the pool. They did a pretty good job on attack. This is something that Frost understands how to deal with these stall comps, and seem to have imparted that pretty well to GE. So their attack was not the problem, but they could not play defense. I was very surprised actually to see them playing this Paper X comp. Sky on Lotus against a comp that kind of just wants to slam sites seems a little bit crazy. They did not really find any success with the Jet operator. I think a big thing against this comp is if you can stop them from getting to the site, generally speaking, you're in a pretty good spot. I wouldn't really say that Jet is a great fighting agent, but she does allow you to maybe, take chances and hold down deep lines that a chamber might as well. But yeah, I think the biggest problem is that GE just really, they weren't able to stop XLG. XLG had a very nice C mound take that was constantly just giving them C. And I don't think that GE did a good enough job holding on to that space. And it allowed XLG to get into the site, plant the spike, and then the round becomes very hard after the fact. Now, moving on to Breeze, which is one of GE's best maps and has been one of their best maps. This one was another game where it looked like GE was going to run away with it. They won Pistol. They won the anti-eco. They won the bonus. And then they come into another anti-eco and just essentially throw the round away. And this was a problem for them. It has been a problem for them all year, which is that their anti-ecos are not very consistent. And if you allow a team to steal the momentum in a critical round like that, where maybe it breaks your economy, maybe it flips the ultimate cycle to favor the other team, shakes your confidence a little bit, all those things can really snowball very quickly. And we saw that here, where all of a sudden XLG, they win the anti-eco round, and then they just win the half. And it was like in dominant fashion. You could see like a switch just flipped, and all of a sudden XLG is playing with confidence. They're taking duels. They're hitting all their shots. And GE couldn't get back online after that. And I think it probably ended up costing them their tournament. Was just yet another anti-eco loss, basically. So impressions of GE overall are pretty good. I think they did a decent job, but they ended up losing in the same way that they've kind of been losing so far this year. So they need to kind of like fix that main problem, which is a fundamentals and discipline problem. And that is going to constantly hold them back unless they can come up with a solution for that. Okay, let's talk about Energy. Energy started off by beating XLG. And, this was a pretty expected result. But I think the way that it went down sort of raised a little bit of a red flag. They won Pearl with relative ease, but then on Lotus, they got kind of smoked. And the only reason that they won is because Kiko dropped one of the best performances of anybody at this event, and one of the best performances of his career, completely saving them on the Omen. And this is not a team that is supposed to rely on hero performances, because they're supposed to be a very solid, fundamentally well-coached team. And so there's a bit of a crack showing for Energy, I think, even as early as this first match. And they go into their next match, which is a domestic one against Lev. They had just recently beaten Lev at EWC. But this was a very telling match for me, because both of these teams do play a pretty, fundamentals heavy, slower style. And you would expect the team that has the better experience and the pedigree of winning champions and being at a bunch of LANs to be the team that has more patience, that has better fundamentals, that can outlast and outweight and outcall the team that is the youngest by average age at the tournament. And yet what I saw from this series was that Lev was the more experienced team. I mean, they're not literally the more experienced team, but they were the team that showed better poise and better patience and better discipline and communication in the critical moments. And also, I will say that it definitely kind of exposed Energy as maybe not having a sort of like a top tier map, because Energy is good at quite a few maps, but they don't have like a checkmate map. And I think that Lev showed that they do. Because I will be shocked if any team plays Lev on Ascent for the rest of the tournament. They looked way too good. They looked way too good on this map. And that is something that is really important going forward into the playoff stage, because if you can just automatically sort of like win a map veto because teams have to ban a map no matter what, even if they're good at it, then it makes it much easier for you to veto and prepare for your opponents as well. So this one really came down to Lev just being the better team overall. There was a lot of uncharacteristic moments where Energy normally would, play together. They would swing together. They would make a plan together. And we just weren't seeing that very much. They were like losing post-plant situations. They were losing man advantage situations. They were making mistakes that you normally don't see this team make. And so I kind of have to wonder, they've had a pretty grueling schedule, right? They did play kickoff into the first Masters, into stage 1, into EWC, into the second Masters. So they've played more Valorant than most other teams. And they really didn't have any time to switch their stuff between EWC and this event. But in the past, that hasn't really mattered. And Lev also had no time between EWC and this event either. So I think the excuse is more so just like they were just kind of sloppy at this tournament. And sometimes that happens. Now, they're still in a fine spot. The bigger one, obviously, was losing to Foot. And this one, oh my God. This game was crazy because I thought this was going to be, a nice bounce back game for Energy, just because Foot is a team that is honestly kind of like Lev, where they just have an unbelievable amount of firepower. They play kind of contact pop style. They play a bit slow. They play very fundamentals based, trade out, shoot. Fairly straightforward. I would actually say that the IGLing from Lev is quite a bit better than Foot. But this was maybe the worst match that I'd seen from Energy play Energy play at the event. And specifically on Haven, Energy had this series 1, right? They were up a map, they won Lotus, kind of grinded this one out in typical Energy fashion, right? Foot was in the lead. Energy came back. It was back and forth, and Energy just won the critical rounds that they needed to win. And that's kind of been their pattern as a team since they brought up Mata and Brock and Scuba, is that they do a very good job of just kind of like outlasting the other team. They make less mistakes, and overall that leads to winning more rounds, even though they might not necessarily be kind of smashing teams all the time. But on Haven, oh my God. They really fell apart in this second half. Specifically on the last round where they could have closed it out at 13-11. They were on an anti-eco, and they bought 2 outlaws to try and like get some picks, do a little bit of contacting with the scope weapon. And Foot did have a couple of ults that made them afraid of getting trapped. But I don't know if I've ever seen Energy play so afraid in a round. It was like they knew that they could get trapped by these Foot ults. And so they just got paralyzed, and they essentially lost to time. They were just in spawn for a minute and 35 seconds and then tried to panic exec on B site. And it was the type of round that you would never expect to see from a team that has won a world championship. So that was kind of a shocking round. And then they go into Fracture, and while it was relatively close, I don't think it actually felt that close. I think Foot were clearly the better team on this map, and were in control for most of the game. Zeus and Sop have been very, very lights out at this tournament. They're a pretty dangerous 1-2 punch, and the rest of Foot has been stepping up in the right moments as well. And so honestly, I think the better team won this match, even though Energy was in control. I think Foot is probably playing better Valorant overall. And so they do make it into the playoffs, which is cool. Energy gets to go rest. But definitely some shocking results coming out of the Swiss stage. And now I want to just quickly talk about the sponsor of this episode, which is Sony InZone. They were kind enough to send me some example products. They sent me a mouse pad, a keyboard, and a headset. And honestly, Sony has always been a brand for me that I've been a fan of. I've been listening to I've been listening to music on Sony headset for a long time. Um, and I was kind of surprised at just how good their gaming peripherals were. I've been using a Logitech Superlight for a long time, but it's been kind of breaking, and so it was the perfect time for me to try out a new mouse. And the Sony InZone mouse that they sent me is at least as comfortable as the Superlight. It's a little bit lighter, in my opinion, and it works great. I've really been enjoying their products actually. And even though I'm not a huge gear nerd, I just want to use stuff that feels good and is high quality in terms of its build. And everything that Sony has sent me, whether it be the headset H92 or the mouse pad, the Mat F, or the mouse A, all of them have been really nice. So be sure you check out Sony InZone down in the description below. I want to thank them for supporting this channel, supporting all of my channels actually, and giving me the opportunity to continue making content, and show them some love, and that'll show me some love as well. So now let's go ahead and move on to the playoffs. Obviously, 4 teams made it through the Swiss stage: Vitality, Lev, Foot, and Shilai. Shilai made it through with a -8 round differential. How did that even happen? Well, let's talk about it. So let's start from the bottom. Shilai Gaming. We've already kind of talked about some of their road here. They lose to Energy, they beat DRG, and then they play against Global, and they got that one out. And I think the big thing for me is we started to see a little bit of the magic that they have back in China. Now, a huge narrative about this team is Rarga. Rarga's confidence. Will he ever reach the heights that he had in China? Now, the thing about Rarga is that I don't really know if he has ever been that guy in China. It's not that he's been bad, but I don't think he's the carry of this team. And I think he's much more of like a system player. And he's got great aim. His mechanics are really good. But I don't think that this team relies on Rarga to win them games. And I think we saw that at this event. Because the carry of this team is Happyway. Happyway is the best statistical player, I think, in the world, certainly in China, and has been for the last year. And he is the guy that opens up everything. And I think that the way that Shilai plays around him is really important. When they don't open up the map by playing aggressively and confidently and taking space, it's very hard for Happyway to find the gaps. And that's where his superpower lies, is that he is a guy who can really carve up a defense if you give him the timings. But he's not going to find the timings if like the duelist and the main core of the pack is not doing their job and taking space and creating disruption. And so when we first saw them play against Energy, a team that is very disciplined and won't necessarily over rotate and won't panic when they get pressured, I think we saw a little bit of sort of the potential downfall of this team, which is like, in addition to also maybe playing kind of unconfidently, they were also running into kind of a brick wall, which was causing Happyway to basically just stare at the map and be like, well, I kind of just have to take a risk. They're watching me, but nothing else is happening on the map, so I have to just do this. And it didn't go great, right? Nobody really had a great game. Happyway did go positive by 1, but it wasn't really a super close series. And they really kind of struggled to get anything going. But against Against DRG, I mean, obviously, this last match was just the Happy Way show. 35-12 plus 23. They would not have won this match without him. But also, he wouldn't have put up these stats if they didn't make the space. I think we saw some pretty good stuff of, taking ramp quickly, which was distracting the players over from middle, which is allowing Happy Way to get in, find a timing, get up into B heaven, come around from behind, call the team back, find some backstabs. And the whole system was kind of working. And so it'll be interesting to see how teams deal with Happy Way going forward, because this guy is, every time he's in the server, he has potential to just drop a nuke. But XLG definitely still has some problems, right? They're definitely still a team that looks a little bit shaky. But against GE, I think they also showed a bit more of that potential. And I think that's a good sign. Unfortunately for them, they play against G2 in the first match. Josh RT was very diplomatic in saying that he thinks they have, a pretty good matchup against this team, so they picked them. They had the first pick, and they picked XLG. And I think that's probably the right choice. So we'll have to see. I'm not going to write them off entirely, but I think we'll have to see how XLG and their confidence bounces back in the lower bracket after losing to G2. We're just going to go ahead and start this pick'em. We're going to pick G2 here. So, good luck to them. It's nice to see them actually get a win over a non-Chinese team, make playoffs after being historically the worst team at internationals since their, ascension in the 2025 season. And, maybe flipping the narrative a little bit for China, which is cool. Talking about Foot, and talking about Foot playing against EDG in the first match, let's get into it. Foot is a team that I will admit I was pretty low on. I didn't think that their kind of contact pop style would work that well at the international events. I thought they were a little bit too simple in how they played the game. And I was also a little bit worried about how much the Neon nerf would hurt this team, just because they played exclusively Neon with Sop on Neon. But I'll admit I was wrong, and Sop is an unbelievable player. This has kind of been a coming out party for him. His jet has been insane. He's played a little bit in Neon as well. It's looked pretty good. But I also think the big thing for them is that they've realized that Zeus, who is also a jet player, needs to be on a movement dive agent as well. Because what they tried earlier on this year was, to put Zeus on, I think they had him on Chamber at some point, if I remember correctly. They had him, playing the Phoenix, and it didn't look very good. They have experimented quite a bit. His raise is okay, but his waylay is quite good. And they definitely have just been leaning into all right, man, just put you on comfort, waylay jet, if possible, some raise here and there, if it makes sense. And I think that having him and Sop as the 1-2 punch is working really well. If they can both go in, they can both play off of each other, and they're entering. It makes a lot more sense for how these players like to play than if they have him, tied to the pack with a Phoenix. And I think it's a situation where if they are on this double dive type of setup, it kind of helps them with how they like to play. So Foot like to open, meaning that they take initial space on the map, and then they like to freeze and go quiet and walk around and find a gap and then pop. And that works okay with a Phoenix Neon, but it works really well when you have two people that can get up to a choke point, and then just immediately enter the site and get deep in enemy territory. And so I think that their current setup is actually working very well. And they're really leaning into, just like the sheer mechanics and just their ability to kind of bully teams that don't put up a good fight. They did lose to Vitality, and their wins were against a FULLSENSE team that looked shell-shocked and an Energy team that looked sloppy. They could have lost this, but beating Energy is a pretty big deal. And I think that going to playoffs, Foot is dangerous. They're definitely a dangerous team. I personally am still going to pick EDG, but I would not fault anybody for picking Foot. And I think this is going to be a very interesting game because EDG is a team that we don't really know how good they're going to be. Like they've got 3 or 4 players that are firing really well. They've got Kong back on the Jet and the Raze. They've got Smoggy playing duelist and he looks good. They've got Chichu taking timings. But how well is that going to translate? They're kind of like a mechanical brawling team, maybe playing against a team that is kind of into that, right? And I think that, I'm a little bit worried. I might even pick Foot here now that I'm thinking about it more, because the way that EDG tends to play is they like to push out for information. And I can just picture in my brain nobody just walking down mid at 50 seconds into the round, and Foot is just frozen waiting for him to do that. So that's a little bit worrying. I'm gonna stick with my guns on EDG just because I picked them to do well, but I could definitely see Foot kind of turning into a bit of a dark horse here at this tournament, based on what I've seen so far. I could see them beating EDG. I mean, hell, I could potentially even see them beating G2, but we won't go there. But yeah, Foot, they look great, and I am very, very interested to see how they look against the number 1 seeds now. Okay. PaperX picked Leviathan. Now, Lev were a team where I was kind of hedging my bets with Lev a little bit. I had them a bit low in my power ranking because I was worried about, number 1, the Neon nerf. I was worried about them playing EWC 1 week before playing London. But I also kind of thought that this is a team that is so young and so ready and hungry to play at an international that they probably won't burn out. And they might even benefit from just playing events. And so I think they came in pretty warm. They didn't really change too much of their stuff. They're still playing the Neon on a bunch of maps with Spike. He's still playing a ton of Neon. Playing a little bit of other stuff here and there, but, they're just playing Neon. They're just playing the stuff that they were playing in Stage 1, and it's still working. We'll have to see how that holds up in the playoffs. I do think that there's, some worry that this team will eventually start getting antied a bit more if they can't change their stuff. And PaperX is actually kind of surprisingly a team that does tend to anti teams. So this is going to be a very tough matchup for Lev to keep going. However, they are a team. They're probably one of maybe like 2 teams at the event remaining that I think matches up with PaperX in terms of their firepower. So they can shoot with PaperX. Lev is warmed up. PaperX is coming in kind of cold. I don't think this is quite as one-sided as it might seem. I definitely think there's a world where Lev can steal this game. I would have to kind of like dig into the map pools and stuff to really make a super informed prediction. But I definitely think there's a world where they could win this. Now, PaperX obviously came out of Pacific. They looked like by far the best team. We now have seen that They were clearly the best team, and maybe the Pacific teams were not as good as they might have been. But I also do think that it's not a stretch to still consider them the best team in the world. Um, they were already sort of shifting off of the Neon meta, and playing the Jet and the Rays and the Phoenix and the Jet. I do think it's going to be a little hard for something to continue the type of impact that he was having, just because when he was playing the Jet, everybody else was playing the Neon, and so a lot of teams were kind of practicing and playing against the Neon. And now there's a lot more Jet in the pool, and so teams are a lot more used to playing against the Jet. And so I don't think he'll have quite the same level of impact that he was having in Pacific. Not that he's going to be bad, but I don't think it's going to be quite as easy. I kind of want to pick Lev just to make people mad. But I think it's going to be hard. I think it's going to be hard. I kind of want to pick Lev. Let's see. I mean, Lev was good. Who did Lev beat? They beat GE. They beat Energy. I think we'll pick Paper X. I think we'll pick Paper X here. But I definitely could see Lev winning this. Okay, let's move on to our next upper quarterfinal, which is Heretics against Vitality. Boo! Regional matchup. So first, I just want to talk about Vitality. I got quite a bit of criticism for putting Vitality in my top 3 in my power rankings. I think some of the reasoning that I gave at that point has come to fruition, which is that Chronicle in international events is just one of the best players ever. Durka at internationals is one of the best players ever. Durka playing Jet and Rays is a very good thing. I definitely think I underrated Sayonara a little bit. I think he's really kind of proven. Oh, and that's one more thing I do want to say is, like, Neon is the truth. The player Neon is the truth. He has continued to have the same insane level of performance at international that he was having domestically. He is the runaway rookie of the year. That being said, Sayonara is rapidly trying to make a case for himself. And I think that he might, depending on which player does come out of this event with a better performance, might be the guy that wins Rookie of the Year for me. So Sayonara has been great. He's looked really good on stage. He's looked good, on the various roles that he's asked to play. And so then that kind of comes down to Profek and Yampy as being potential weak links, but both of them have also stepped up. I think this is a very, very dangerous team. And going into a regional matchup where they played each other back in EMEA, I believe in a best of 5. They have a lot of data on each other. We don't really know what Heretics is going to be doing. There's going to be added pressure of being sort of the hometown team to some extent. I think I might pick Vitality in this one. Now, this might be a bit overrating Vitality because they beat the worst team in groups, or maybe the second worst team in groups, and then they beat a domestic opponent. But I think that Vitality is very good. And I think that because we don't know so much about Heretics yet, will Koshmara still play the Neon? Probably, based on what we've seen so far. Neon seems to be pretty good. But the rest of Heretics, how good is their form going to be? I think in EMEA, we saw Benji kind of coming back into form. Boo was having a very good season. Woot, obviously, is always pretty good. And then Rian's is coming back into form. I think it's going to be kind of a banger match. And I'm going to go with the team that's already played on stage. that has a couple of players that have maybe a little bit better international performance than the Heretics players, but either one of these teams could win. I'm going to go with Vitality. And yeah, I mean, it's going to be fun. Okay, I'm going to try and speed through the rest of this just because obviously we don't know who is going to actually be here. I would take G2 over EDG. I would take PaperX over Vitality, I think. I would take Foot over Gili. I think. And then here, Lev versus Heretics. Ooh, Lev versus Heretics would be a real crazy elimination match. I mean, either way, Vitality versus Lev, Vitality versus PaperX. Whoever loses this one, it's a disaster. It's a disaster. Unfortunately, I think this might be where I take the experience. I mean, Lev showed that they have the experience to outpatient, out fundy a team like Energy, but can they do it again? They would also have shown even more stuff. I think I would go for Heretics here. Oh man, we'd have all the EMEA teams in the lower bracket. That would be kind of nuts. Okay, sure. Let's do it. PaperX has beaten G2 consistently. Vitality against Foot. I think I would still go with Vitality again. EDG against Heretics. A rematch of champs. I think I would go with Heretics. Heretics against Vitality rematch again. We'll go with Heretics. Since they would have played each other again. You know, I like to go with the rematch going the other way. G2 against Heretics. Let's go Heretics. Another lower bracket run for this team. The storylines going crazy. Benji Fishy on the main stage, and he takes it down in the grand finals. You heard it here first. Form invalid. I don't know what that means. Anyway, that's my pick'em. That's my pick'em. Says it's failed to save, so maybe it'll be different. But no, this is what I'm going to go with. Okay. Now, one last thing that I want to talk about is the duelist meta. Because I heard that Phoenix was the best agent in the game. I heard that Neon was dead. And yet, that's not what we're seeing. Right now, the best duelist, obviously, caveat for all of this, is sample size is quite small. However, the duelist meta is very balanced right now. We've got 39% pick rate for Phoenix, 41% for Jet, 26 for Raze, 28 for Neon, 24 for Waylay. Waylay has the best stats overall in terms of round win rate. Neon has the best map win rate, pretty good round win rate. Raze also doing quite well. And the more popular ones, Jet and Phoenix, doing poorly. However, Jet's stats are quite good, definitely inflated by Primi. But Phoenix, for me, is the big one. Phoenix has really been struggling. And I think part of this is sort of like who has been playing it, right? We haven't seen Jing play Phoenix yet. But I do think that Phoenix was fairly overrated. This tends to happen whenever there's like an agent that everybody starts playing. Then everybody starts playing it on every map, and every team starts playing it. Once teams are kind of used to like the play patterns, it gets countered. And Phoenix is like a pretty one-dimensional agent. You farm the orb, you try to ult, and then on defense, you do little trap plays with your flash. That's basically it. And I think that sort of like small toolbox of plays that you can do is not going to allow Phoenix to really dominate the meta against good teams. Now, there are definitely good maps for Phoenix. I think like Pearl is a good map for Phoenix because like of the way that the Molly interacts with the map, the places where you can do flashes. Phoenix is definitely a pretty good agent in certain places, in certain comps, on certain maps. But I actually think the duelist meta is very healthy right now. And I want to kind of point to Waylay actually as an agent that I would like to see more of, because I think that this agent got massively, massively underrated because of the one small change to the saturate. They went from having just a completely broken ability, right? Like the saturate before being instant cast was way too good. It meant that you could just instantly react, stop a push. There was no sort of like negative to being able to do that, because you didn't have to sit there with your gun taken away. You could just sit there with your gun out, shoot, and then, you know, saturate everybody else and then get away. It was way too strong. And it allowed for the crazy dive bomb play style that we saw 100 Thieves and a bunch of other people doing. And so they took away the broken part, but Waylay is still insanely good. The ult is still really, really strong. The ability to dash in and recall and then have a second layer come in is still really, really good. You can still dash in and bucky people if you pair it with like a drone or a dog. And I think Waylay is probably still kind of a better Jet in a lot of cases, and everybody's just playing Jet. So I think that teams that play some more Waylay will be in a good spot. And also, again, just like, you know, Neon, Raze, there's a lot of good agents, and it really just depends on like what the comp is and how you play them and who you play them with. So I'm very curious to see how this continues to develop. You know, maybe Phoenix does make a resurgence back with some of the better teams, but I do think that as it currently stands, the duelist meta is in a very healthy place. Obviously, rest in peace to Yoru. Rest in piss to to Reyna. But basically all the other duelists are playable. ISO is whatever. Which is cool to see. I think that Riot did a pretty good job. Like, Neon feels less bullshit than she used to feel, but she still feels good and playable. So that's nice to see that she's not like completely out of the meta and still seems to be relatively useful. So with that being said, that is going to end the episode. Thank you guys for watching, and we will see you after Masters London for the next one.